on. We are on Gimel Amid Beis, but we're actually going to begin for today on 3A3. Everybody go back to 3A3. Okay, right on the bottom. Okay, on 3A3, we asked the question like this: Man tanu lahada tanu rabbana. Who taught this v'raisa? Okay, was the last thing in the it's 3A3. We're in the right-hand column in English. You go to Home Depot, you buy a storage thing, one of those storage huts, but it's not 4x4 amas, a shed. Thank you. And it's not 4x4 amas, smaller. Okay. And therefore, it does not have the name of a. Does not. A. Remember, I said right here. Right. No, I went back to it. Okay. It therefore does not have the name of a house. Okay. And by definition, it doesn't have the name of a house. It doesn't need a mezuzah on its door or the mitzvah of putting up a fence on its roof so that people shouldn't fall off, especially on the flat roofs. And it does not contaminate with negoyim from tziras. If you remember, in Torah, even houses can get some tziras growth here, but it can only be a bias, something that legally has the name of a bias. Something less than 4x4 does not have the legal definition of a house. And it's not irredeemably sold with regard to the rules of the walled city, which are like this. In the rules of the walled city, that if somebody sold a house to somebody else, he gets 1 full year to redeem his house. He's allowed to get it back. Otherwise, he loses it forever. What? In a walled city. Exactly. Here we're saying, no, since this does not have the rules of a house, if you sell it, you have all the time you want in the world to redeem it, like anything that would be not in a walled city. And that in Yovel, in the Jubilee year, guess what? It goes back, which means that all real estate transactions like that are not purchases, are long-term rentals. Okay? Well, the condominium, you own shares.
For 15 years.
No. Condominium is no. No, either co-op you own shares, and a condominium you actually own the thing. But the better explanation would be that, especially in Manhattan, all those tall skyscrapers, the people may own the building, they don't own the land that's underneath the building. New York City owns the land, and they exactly right. They say but here is in New York, you actually have to do a purchase of the building, and you have to make a lease with New York City. They're usually 100-year leases, and that is why in year 75 of those leases, that's when a lot of these buildings change hands, because the city within 25 years is about to raise your rent on the use of their land.
Here, you only own till Yovel.
Till Yovel, it's a long-term rental. It's a long-term rental. It's 100-year. It's a 50-year lease. And in fact, the closer you get to Yovel, the cheaper the prices, because that's it. Exactly. What? On what it produced. Yeah, not today, because again, that's an agricultural. But even as they move to the cities, the Gemara in many places doesn't even talk about that. It sort of says, because real estate does not have price controls. Real estate is determined by the market. Staples, meaning bread, water, wine, oil, you're only allowed to make a profit of 6%. So there was a price controls. But real estate has no price control. That's a Gemara for a different place, and a major discussion of what Torah capitalism looks like. Because it was not pure capitalism, it was capitalism with a great safety net underneath it, right? Yeah. Because it recognized that you couldn't have the spread of poor to rich. gets so wide because then society breaks apart. So it understood that you have the right to make a profit. You don't have the right to make a huge profit on things that are staples of people's lives. But real estate was something else entirely. Real estate, the chosim, meaning the called the chosim sheyesh lehem achrayus, the chosim that have responsibility, as it were. That's real estate. Real estate is determined by the market. But we'll get into it. It's a much larger discussion when we get into the monetary mesechtes, and fascinating stuff, because you're gonna realize that what business law today was essentially established by our Chazal back in the day, and the idea of inflationary pressures, paperless money, Baba Metzia clearly recognized the credit card and the check, and had set up the Jewish. That is why when we've been allowed to, we have been inordinately good at business, because in truth, it's Torah. In truth, it's Torah. We've been 2,000 years ahead in monetary theory from the rest of the world. But what? Yeah, it's public here. But of course we had it. This is just, they put it down to writing because it was getting lost. It was there from Talach L'Moshe Sinai. As we're going to see something today, as we move along, with regard to what a wall is. What exactly is the definition of a wall, of a partition? And it has. I'm talking about, but I have to about legal. But I'm talking about illegal. But in truth, it's a question in ownership. Because when you build a wall and all that, you're putting a stake down. You're saying, this is mine. This is my space. And that has ramifications today, even in legal law, in non-Jewish law. So let's keep going here. Anyways, so the Ein Chayzin Allah Ma'archei HaMelchama, and we do not return with regard to the ranks of the warriors, meaning in this last week's Parsha, when we go to war, we said anybody who built a house, and this is the first year of that house that he built, doesn't have to go to war, gets the right to use the fruits of his labor. That doesn't account for a house that's less than 4x4, a shed. Okay, the aim Arvin boy, and we do not make an Erev Chatzeris with such a house, as we said before, where a bunch of houses pour into a shared courtyard. They have to make an Erev Chatzeris, in order for everybody to walk in that courtyard. This house is not part of that. It's not considered a house. It's not a problem. The aim is from boy. The same thing with the Shituf Mivoyas. This we talked about yesterday. If you remember, you have houses that opened into a common courtyard that opened into an alleyway that led out to the public thoroughfare, to the Rishus Harabim. That alleyway, which Midiarais is Rishus HaYochid, a private property, rabbinically you had to make an Erev there as well, called the Shituf Mivayis. The Ein Manichem by Erev, and we do not place an Erev, the Erev Chatzeris, into the house. Note that the Braisa here went right back to Erev Chatzeris. It doesn't mention anything about the Shituf Mevoyis and putting it in over there, and the Gemara is going to talk about it in about a second. Very good. We are now on Gimel Amid Beis, where we were up to yesterday. The Ein Oisin Ibur Ben Shnei Aroyas, and we do not make a house of between the two cities. In other words, everybody knows you get 2,000 amas, right? On Shabbos, you're allowed to walk 2,000 amas in a direction from the end of your city. But what happens if you have two cities that are right next to each other? So I'll give you an example. You have Boca Raton and Deerfield. Okay, they're near each other. As long as they're within a certain geographic, close enough together, about 140 amas to be exact, close to each other, we look at them as if they're one large city, which means you just doubled the amount of space that you can walk on the Shabbos. What happens if there's slightly?
You have to have a house.
So that's what I'm about to say. Now, you got this space; they're within 140 of each other, right? But what happens if they're really within 143 of each other? So now there were houses that the end house that protruded outwards. So the back of the houses made it into 140 between them. We said that's fine, that's okay, because the back of the house is like the front of the house. So the back of the house is sticking out into that empty space between the two cities. But behind, if you look at the back of this house, in the back of this house, it's got the distance between them is less than 140, right? Or actually 141 and a third. Okay, 100. Okay, to be exact, it's a Gemara and Eruvin. It's not a point, right at this point. Okay, but we're saying these sheds that are less than 4x4, which usually are in the backyards, so it would be the things sticking out. They don't have a definition of a house. They don't have a definition of a house. They can't be used as Perusia to bring them closer within this 140, 1/3 amas together, and therefore you can't combine the cities. That's what this Gemara is saying. And again, it's the same idea. It doesn't have the name of a house. It's a nothing. Okay? And the Eino Achin V'Shutvan Cholkabay. And brothers and partners do not divide such a house. 2 times 0 is still 0. Simple. So says the Gemara. Lema Rebbe. Let's say this Baraisa is the opinion of Rebbe, who says that a sukkah less than 4 amas squared is not a kosher sukkah. V'loy Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon, because the Rabbanon seem to be saying 7 tvachim. Remember that? Yesterday we had an argument whether it is the minimum size of a sukkah 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, which is clearly a lot short. It's about 21 inches by 21 inches, as opposed to 4 amas by 4 amas. 4 amas by definition is about 72 inches. Okay, right? 18 times 4, right? 18 is 36, is 72 exactly. Okay, so it looks like this. Says the Gemara, no, I feel time in the Rabbanon. This price could even be the Rabbanon. I'd come like a Rabbanon Hacha over there regarding the interior space of that you need 4 amas by 4 amas squared. Ela Indian Sukkah, the Diras Arayu, because you need a rule that it has to be a temporary dwelling. Avalagabi Bayis, the Diras Kavahu, which is a fixed dwelling. I feel Rabbanon Maida, the Rabbanon would be Maida. The E is amas al arba amas, that if the inside has exactly 4 amas by 4 inches, Dori bay inchi, people dwell in it. V'loy Dori bay inchi, but if it's not that spacious, people do not dwell in it. So for a sukkah, which is only a temporary, right? That's one of its realities. It must be a temporary dwelling. So 7 by 7 tvachim is good enough. You don't have to have comfort in a dwelling that's temporary. But in a house, by definition, which is built to be a residential, to be fixed, to put furnishing in, there you need a minimum size of at least 4 by 4 so that people could at least sit comfortably in it. So if you remember, I said I made that sukkah when I was a kid. Back right, I made that board from Home Depot. I cut it in 2, and you put the hinges on it. And it was good enough for one person to sit in there, right? Right, exactly one person to sit in it, but that was okay because it was big and it was at least 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. It got me in there. But let me be honest with you, it was not a place to live. The collapsible sukkahs, the travel sukkahs. What? No.
But it's the
right.
minimum.
So now let's go further. Here we go. Amamar. We said the house that doesn't have 4 by 4 is exempt from the mezuzah and from putting up a gate on its roof, flat roof. The aim is tamim in goyim, and it does not contaminate with saras. The aina nichla bebotei arichayma, and it's not irredeemable sold. What do you call it? The houses of a walled city means you can redeem it for as long as you want, and it comes back to you by Yaibel. The ain chayzin Allah ma'arich al mechama, and it's not considered a new house in order to keep you out of the war.
Cities, not any walled city.
No, from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, which is really Yerushalayim at this point in the game. My Tom. Okay, what's the reason that such a house is exempt? No. As long as it had a wall back then, right? Okay,
It's not modern day Jerusalem.
modern day Jerusalem was the old city.
It's only in the old city. It's not outside the wall.
There was no outside the wall. The outside the wall was already it's called different names. Because you have to remember, what we think today of city. Actually, you have to understand something. In today's world, we're used to countries enormous and all that. We don't think about it twice. Back in the day, and not that long ago, there were city states. Because if you couldn't travel, right? If horse and buggy could only get you, how far, right? And transportation was everything. That's why Rome built roads. Without those roads, how do you have an empire? You had to be able to get from one end of the empire to the other empire in as short a period of time as possible, right? So this, you have to know that. The old city, which we could walk through from the Jaffa Gate to the Kaisel, takes 7 minutes maybe, right? Or if you don't stop, right? Straight to the old city. But nonetheless, that was a full city, right? So we have to understand it again. We can't look at the modern world, which is remarkably modern, because the car is how old? 100 years old. I mean, I'm saying exactly. My grandfathers who were born in Eastern Europe, they grew up with horse and buggies. They didn't grow up with cars. And I didn't even know when electricity got there. When did Gross Verdine get Gross?
I remember seeing cars in France where if you wanted to stop the motor, you had to crank it.
Grandfather told me about that in World War I.
Yeah.
Crank the trucks.
So there's no question about it. So, and now the combustible engine is on its way out. Can you see how fast time goes? Anyways, so my Tama, what's the reason? And the reason, of course, is what we've been saying the whole time. The bias ksibuhu bekulu. The word bias says by all of them. The Torah uses the word bias, house. What is the definition of a house? One of the definitions of a house, nothing less than a 4x4. Less than a 4x4 does not reach the criteria of a house. The aim boy, the aim is boy, and we do not make erev chatzeres, nor do we make a shit of mezuzos. The aim anichsem boy erev, we do not place the erev chatzeres in this house. My tama, the loy chazi ledira, because anything less than 4x4 is not worthy for dwelling. By definition, you're making an erev because you want to move from one dwelling to another dwelling. So, says the Gemara, the question we asked before. We said we do not place an erev chatzeres in the shed. But we do place the shit of mevayis into it. My tama. What's the difference? What's the difference between an erev and a shiv? It's the same thing. The same way I make an erev chatzeres because houses open up, plenty of houses open into this one chatzer. This one chutzah opens up into an alleyway that everybody uses to get out into the public throwaway, into the Rishus HaRabim. It says the Gemara, because a house smaller than 4x4 is no worse than a courtyard in a mavli, and a shituf can be placed in the courtyard of a mavli. Okay, so it says the Gemara, Tznan, we learn like this: 3b2, erev chatzeres b'chatzer, an erev chatzeres are placed in the courtyard, because that's exactly what it is. What's the definition of erev chatzeres? An erev for a chatzah. What's a chatzah? A courtyard. The erev for the courtyard can be put in the courtyard. Shituf mavui b'mavui. The shitufei mavui, the erev of the mavui, is put into the mavui. Good. V'avinim bei, and we learned erev chatzeres b'chatzah. Can it be that the erev chatzeres is put into the courtyard? V'tanan, we learned there in the Mishnah, an erevin. V'anois in eruv bebayis bebeis shar achsadro umir peses. We place the erev in a gatehouse, a portico, or a gallery, on a second floor, or on a gazebo, or in a gate. Einay erev. If you do, it's not called an erev. Why? Because none of these are actually meant for living. It's not a dwelling. The guardhouse is not a living, and the gazebo is not a living. And And therefore, one who lives there in one of these structures does not restrict everybody else from using the chotzer, right? Because, clearly an Arab must be located in a dwelling of the courtyard, not in the courtyard itself. Because you see over here, they're saying these dwellings are no good because they're not for dwellings, right? These structures are not for dwelling, meaning that you need to put it into a structure that is for dwelling. Says the Gemara, Elaima, let's change the wording. A ruvi chatzeris v'bayis shebechatzer. The Erev chatzeris is placed in the house of the courtyard. V'shtuve mevoyis b'chatzer shebemovi. And the shtuve mevoyis are placed in the courtyard of the movi. V'hai loy gora michatzer shebemovi. And this house that is smaller than 4 amas is no worse than the courtyard of the movi itself. So while an Erev may not be placed in such a small house, the shidduch may be put in there, because where does it go? It goes into the courtyard, not into a dwelling that's in the courtyard. A shidduch is allowed to be in the courtyard itself. And this little house is part of that courtyard. Does this make sense? Jeff, Brad, you see it? Okay. And we said you do not use such a house to connect two cities, one to the other as one, to create a much larger tchum. Jeff, you got an issue? Everything's good. You're sure? Okay. Don't be afraid to ask. Because we do not equate it even as a hut, which could extend the Shabbos boundary on a Shabbos. Now, a hut could be smaller than a 4x4. Think about it, right? A hut could be big. Why? My Tama. Burgonian Chazul Messiah. The hut is fit for its intended purpose. It might be small, but that's what it's for. This is not fit for its purpose. A shed is meant for a shed. It's not meant to be a temporary dwelling place. And the brothers and the partners do not divide such a house. Why not? Tama de les be arba amas. That's because it's less than 4x4. Ha is be arba amas chalkin. We get less than 2. And that's 2 times 0. 2 times 0 is still 0. Ha is be arba amas chalkin. Right, the Gemara really, but Tanan, but we learned in a Mishnah in Baba Basra, we do not divide a jointly held courtyard against the will of one of the partners. Unless after the split, you will have at least 4 amas for this partner and that 4 amas for that partner. Right? Because each one needs to have something of value, which is at least 4 amas. That means one partner or brother cannot compel the other to divide a house where there's only 4 amas squared to begin with. Because when you split it, what do you end up with? 2 and 2, which is nothing, because 4 is something. You'd have to bid the yoke. So how do you explain our Brisa over here? Inquiring minds want to know. Says the Gemara, Ella Ema Ein Boydin Chaluka B'Chatzer. Say that the Brisa is telling us that such a house is not subject to the splitting up of a courtyard. The Omer Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said, Chatzer lefi pisachel mischalekes. A courtyard is divided according to the amount of entrances to how. In other words, how many houses. Meaning, remember I said we've got a bunch of houses, right? We got a bunch of houses that open into a common courtyard. So let's say you got 5 houses, they're all opening into the common courtyard. Okay? By the way, I asked this to Rabbi Gibber before. We all know we have an Erev here in Boca Raton, and everybody holds it's good. I don't really understand how this works. I'm allowed to rely on the Psak Din, but I don't know how it works. Why? Because we are all in closed HOAs. So the little streets that we have are actually courtyards in which all our houses open up onto. The entire Mandarin is opening up onto Mandarin Street, which is a courtyard. which leads out onto Boca Grove Boulevard, which is actually the Mavui that takes us out to the public thoroughfare. A chotzer would require an Erev Chatzeres for us to use. And even one person who doesn't get involved in the Erev can restrict everybody else. And you could just imagine Randy Miller will never agree to be part of our Erev Chatzeres. Let's just accept it. That's okay. Your father is a neighbor a few houses down. And, okay, it's not the point. I'm just using him as a, maybe he would agree. I shouldn't say that. Maybe he would agree. But you'd have to explain it to him a lot. Okay? You see, he's Jewish, but he doesn't know anything. So you'd have to explain it a lot. Right, okay. But the point here is, how do you explain it to Jennifer Jolly or anybody else, the Goyim, who restrict as well, because they have use of the courtyard too? I actually asked this question to Rabbi Gibber when we were learning Eruvin, and he said, "Good question. I have to get back to you," and he hasn't gotten back to me.
Yes, it's very good.
But so
I'm not so sure that Rabbanim of Berlin, Flatbush or Borough Park would agree.
Actually, I can't say that because Ramosh Paskin. Right? No. Let me tell you, if there are Rabbanim Paskin, then it's good. Then it's good. That's not the question. But I still have the question. I'd like to get an answer. Yeah, because one has nothing to do with the other. You're right. The Erev allows us to carry. But there's a separate rule about courtyards, rabbinically, not biblically. Certainly not a biblical problem. In fact, the entire Boca Raton, by the way, does not require an Erev. You know that.
Why?
Because there's less than 600,000 people in the entire Boca Raton. Because go do the math. Go look up the thing. Power line, but no. That's right. And power line does not have 600,000 people passing through it on a daily basis. Oh, no. Not even close. It doesn't have it. It may be 16 amas across, maybe, but no, it doesn't, because it has a divider in the middle. It has a divider in the middle, so it may be two separate things. Okay, that's number one. You know the divider in the middle, right? So that number one might be what do you call? But let's say it's not. So let's say it's 16 amas across. There's definitely no 600,000 people passing through. So biblically speaking, no problem. You see, my father's talking about Borough Park and Flatbush. In Borough Park and Flatbush, there's huge problem, because Ramosha Paskins that Brooklyn cannot have an Erev. We who come from Yeshiva of Tavidas agrees with Ramosha. I mean, of course you agree with Ramosha, and we don't carry. It happens to be the Hasidim, by and large, carry. They put up an Erev. They said, no, you can carry, and their place can paskin in Borough Park. Okay, now in Flatbush, most people don't carry, but the young Israel of Flatbush paskin that you could make an Erev in Flatbush too. And there are people. There was maybe, I think, Rabbi, the one on the big one on Avenue Y, the big one. When I say the young Israel, I mean the young Israel of Avenue Y, the biggest young Israel of them all, Rabbi Walkman. That's not the point. I'm making a point here. Okay, all of this thing. This question happens to be unique to us because we all live in HOAs. HOAs are contained, right? You could make it there for the whole Boca. Question is, what do each of us individually in our own HOAs? How do we get around the Erev Chatzeres part?
So are you saying this is like you're looking at Boca Grove
as a separate entity within a much larger? It's a big court, which it is, because you can't get in and out. Like my father's Pradera, you can't get in and out of it. You got to go through the gate. And even if it does not gate it, it doesn't matter. Everybody shares, like Thornhill by Montoya Circle. Every place, the whole Boca is that way. No houses on the streets. The houses are all behind walls. By definition, we're all sharing Mandarin Drive. What? And I would say, theoretically, Boca Grove is the alleyway in and out of a. Can you get out? Can you get out any other way except by Boca Grove Boulevard? No. So Boca Grove Boulevard is the Mavoi. It's literally the biblical. It's literally the Talmudical case. Okay. All right. Inquiring minds want to know. So we're all gonna next time we see Rabbi Gibber, we're gonna say, listen, we learned this Gemara today. He's doing the daf, and you can say it's whoa. It's a serious question. The ORB, I asked him already the question once. I'm going to remind him of the question. The question came up again, so we're asking it again. He actually said he was going to have a gasipa with all the Rabbanim to ask him that question. Rabbi Goldberg, Rabbi Gibber, Rabbi Rabowski, all the Rabbanim of the town.
And none of them know the answer.
Yeah, you see, I'm the Briscoes. I'm a little dangerous.
When we first moved in, I got a letter.
It's a shame that Jerry's not on here today.
Was contributing to the Boca Raton area.
Yeah. I gave him $100. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Best thing you should do, Google after the share. Google Boca Erev. You get a whole map.
Yeah.
And then you get above that the Chabad Erev, which is larger. But that's only if you're Chabad. If you're not Chabad, you can't rely on that other piece. Because you're not Chabad. You could, if you wanted, you could. So they're saying under the ORB, this is the Erev. The Chabad they go further. That's all. That's all they're saying. Under the ORB, since we rely on the ORB. Always. Right. Which means leniency always goes first.
Another rabbi that's more lenient, not because of his ignorance. I'm saying
because of his knowledge.
You go according to him, because his knowledge is so vast that he's able to figure out the lenient, the truth, saying this is would be a larger error would be fine. The one who's ignorant, who's not so well versed, would be afraid to. Right. Therefore, he takes a more stringent, only to protect himself. That's it.
Yeah, go ahead.
When he was before the Indian flag, one who was in small city where nobody had ever heard of him. And just did the Bible based measure. That'd be the end. The rabbi at the shul was like the opposite of this, not lenient at all. And so the area didn't have a lot of money. So when we would come with a pop question, no,
right.
But one day I go over and I want to make sure it was kosher. It was the rabbi. I said, no, not kosher. And so the ties was flying right out.
Right, because that's it. They're right.
And he's like, now it's that situation. Go to the girl, go to the rabbi, they took the ties, they did the dough, and that's what it's she goes there. Sure enough, like it's kosher.
Right. And then he said, how do you know about it? He said, the old man in the back.
Now he's got a 9-year-old situation.
The rabbi has no choice. Right.
That's fair enough. They make him rabbi.
Okay, you become the rabbi.
That's it. This is very similar to Rashi. This is what he called Rashi. How did there was no WhatsApp, no printing press. So Rashi wrote his kuntras and he went on a road trip. And he was unknown. And he just dropped off the kuntras. He went all the way to Salonika or whatever it was. And then he came back, to the Italian peninsula and all the way back to France. And on the way back, people along the way kept saying these kuntras, and they went from one town to another. Who is this writing? Look at this. It's unbelievable. Yeah. And then they somehow put it together. This guy, he was in his 30s. Amazing, his 30s, 20s, late 20s, early 30s. He's just dropping this up. It's amazing what they accomplished so young. What do you call it? Yeah, at 45, he got sick. the last 15 years of his life, he actually wasn't well. From 45 to 60, he wasn't well. What do you call it? Everything was done before 45. It's amazing. Anyway, so
There was a story.
so the way back it was same thing.
Sitting in the back of the. Nobody knew who he was.
He always walked that little cap, like a baseball cap, you know.
Rabbi was giving a lecture. Anyway, he built up the whole thing, edifice of till
Pilpul, right?
Yeah. And people heard this old man in the back mumbling. Some Ferish Mishnah was verkehrt.
There's a Mishnah that says just the opposite.
And the rabbi was going in building, coming to a climax, you know, and he kept saying, so somebody asked, what's this man mumbling? Somebody came over to the rabbi. He says that there is a Mishnah, a clear Mishnah that says opposite of what you said. You know what? You know they called him in. They looked. The whole edifice collapsed.
Even though I must say this famous story with the Rabbi Yosef Ben Soloveitchik. Gave a shir, and one of the Talmidim asked a question. Thought for a minute. Said, "You're right." Right? Threw it out. Yeah. But yeah, that's it. You have to sometimes admit that you know, that's what they call. But it is remarkable to think about that Agadolim, like the Rambam, what he accomplished in 69 years is just.
You don't have those kind of Gedolim anymore.
Even actually, Rav Moshe Feinstein
was the only man, the last one.
Rav Moshe Feinstein maybe, and but you know it's different.
You go Moshe,
that's on the
Moshe Maimonides.
To Moshe Feinstein. They said it again.
Nobody was like.
In other words, who can look at Rav Moshe? People don't understand this. Everybody knows from the Igros Moshe, right? The Igros with the letters of Moshe, the Shalos and Shuvas. And Moshe said, I don't know why everybody spends so much time on the Igros Moshe. She started publishing his life. Why is nobody looking at the Dibros Moshe, the words of Moshe? He wrote Pilpulei HaTorah al deep shot, not brisket pilpul. Al deep shot only with Rishonim. He never quotes Achronim Kamat. It means stopped more or less quoting anybody for after the 1500s. On Shas, some of his Chidushim go 50 pages for one. It's famous. Anaf Aleph, Anaf Bey. Some of them go 75 pages to try to hold even on 2 pages of the Dibros Moshe, just to try to hold where he's going and all that. And it's almost impossible. And that's why nobody learns him. Because you can't hold him. You can't hold him. And he has them like on almost all of Shas. I mean, a good chunk of the Yeshiva, Shivas, the Dibros Moshe. When you learn Yeshiva, they ever call it the Dibros Moshe? Come on, never. You know, but when you're learning himself, to pull it out, just to have fun, to understand the questions that he asks. Like there's a famous Gemara about Yesh Breira, Ein Breira, where remember, if you remember Yesh Breira, no, it's what I do now defines what I meant before. So a father says to son, whichever one of my children will get to Yerushalayim first, he will be the one assigned on the Karban Pesach, right? So that's, we say that he beforehand, you have to be assigned beforehand. So when whoever gets there, we now know who he meant to assign. The Gemara says, it's a bunch of nonsense, right? It's only trying to be mechanech his children, right? To get them to be Zerizim Makdiman, to be excited. In Gittin, I think Daf Chav Hey, says Rav Moshe, that's the way you mechanech children. You lie to them. You tell them whoever will be there first will be the one assigned, when in fact they're all assigned, and it's a whole bunch of nonsense. And the Gemara says it. He says, I don't understand the Gemara. He said, but the Gemara says it, that you could do this. And he brings rayas that you're not allowed to be mechanech this way. We just learned it before, right? Remember? With chinuch, we said you have to do it exactly right. Right? You have to put him in a sukkah. The child can't be in the sukkah. It's got to be the exactly thing. Brings these Gemaras. And he blibes. He says, Tzarech you got to be here. It's a brilliant question. I once did a whole pilpul. I brought a brisket eretz, and then I said, Elamira, Moshe didn't hold from the brisket Torah. I said, except the fact he does hold from the brisket Torah, because in the Igros Moshe, you see that he has the same logic. So what's the difference? It's unbelievable. But it wasn't the point. To understand Ramesh's mind. Look at what.
It's just like Yiddish trade, you know, anything else.
Yeah.
Everything Yiddish trade.
Yeah.
It always rises.
Always.
And it's not challenged. It's like nobody's challenging our emotion, you know?
Right. No.
Nobody can, but anything else, like there's a challenge.
Right. There is so I will tell you the Satmaras only in two psukim did the Satmarov argue with Ramosha. But on one of them, artificial insemination, okay, where Ramosha said it's allowed and the Satmarov did not allow, and we passed like Ramosha, and with today everything is this. Nonetheless, he sent over his Bezdin over the Williamsburg Bridge to discuss with Ramosha, but he told them, Retish mit them in halacha. Don't talk to Ramosha in halacha. Talk to him about Yiddishkeit and that it's going to be a disaster for Yiddishkeit. No, listen, for a half hour they did this. They spoke to him, and then Ramosha said, yeah. Oh, but what's the halacha? And then he wiped the floor with them. And then they came back to the Sabbath. I told him, don't talk to him in halacha. Don't talk. Very, very, very famous story. That's Chatzkel. Ross. It was one of those Dayanim. He was in his 20s at the time. He's already Dayanim. Anyways, we only got into 10 minutes here, and we haven't even hit today's daf yet, as is usually the case. So let's keep going over here. So we just said, Reb Chizda, remember, you have 5 houses, the doors open, 5 doors opening into the Shirat Chatzir. We now have the question we have to ask Rabbi Giver, and I can see Brad has got his antennas up. He's going to go ask Yitzchak Zimmerman's, re-ask Yitzchak Zimmerman's kasha. I did ask him, I'm still waiting for the answer.
The reason why you give 4 amas for each entry.
But I didn't say that yet. Whoop. We give each door, each door for each one. So first things to what? Everybody automatically gets their 4 amas. We have a rule, by the way, that everybody, social distancing. We always had social distancing. It's called everybody's kind of their own dollar amas. Everybody owns their 4 square cubic feet around, 4 square around them. Everybody's got their thing. So if somebody throws something within 4 amas of you, you're kind of. It's like your chutzner. Same thing over here. Every door that you walk out of, right? You have to have that belongs to you.
Why you have to have 4 amas?
Okay.
Because it's a simple
Yeah.
for delivery.
Right. I forgot that the UPS.
Yeah.
Right. They have to be able to put your packages.
Wagon with a horse, a buggy, whatever.
They got to put your packages down. It's practical. Practical. You got to be able to have a loading dock. If you go look at the yard scroll, essentially that's what they write. A loading dock. Every house has got to have their own loading dock. Simple. And if you think about it, in the days of produce and everything else, the way it was done, that's right. You needed a wagon to be able to pull up to do it. So everybody gets the thing. So now you see, Abraisa teaches that regardless how it is, everybody is not applied to a house less than 4 amas squared. Now, the Hani Mili Be'ayis Del Mexicoi. For all of these rulings, grant shears in the courtyard only to a house that's going to endure, that's a house that's going to stay. So therefore it's appropriate that there should be a portion part of the chutzner. This thing that less than 4 amas, is doomed to be destroyed. If the wind blows strong enough, there goes your shed. We don't award it a chutzner. Simple, says the Gemara. So now we're getting now. We said before about the 20 amas, right? Schach, that is above 20 amas. Machlaikis, the Rabbanah say no good. Rabbi Yehuda says good. Good. The sukkah was more than 20 amas high. Okay? The interior height from the floor to the schach was more than 20 amas. So that means the schach by definition was what? Above 20 amas. Good. Ubalamayit v'korim u'b'chosos, and one came to reduce its height by laying mattresses and cushions on the floor of the sukkah, thereby raising the floor. Okay, thereby raising the floor. Lo havimiyut, it's not a raise. It's not a valid reduction, and you still have a problem with more than 20 hours. We're, believe it or not, we're on today's daf. Even though you've abandoned them, right? In other words, Rashi says a chol shiva, but ladati eitzel kolodam a bittul, right? Eitzel kolodam ain't a bittul. In other words, even though you personally will mevatel your cushions and your pillows, and you said we're going to sit on top of them, not a problem. Mishum debatola data eitzel kolodam, because bittul, nullification, is a universal idea. Most people do not nullify their pillows and their blankets. You don't. And your mattresses, you don't. You don't nullify them. So just because you personally do it, that's not good enough. It doesn't count, right? It's not a free-for-all. Okay? That's what it's saying. Very simple. Now, on the other side, tevenu batloi, if one spread straw on the sukkah floor and to raise the floor's height, and then he verbally abandons it, right? He nullifies it verbally. Habi miyut, that constitutes a reduction. The kol shekain upper ubitla, and certainly the earth. If you pour earth on it and you raise the floor, certainly. Says the Gemara, v'teven v'ein osir lipanos. If one spread straw on the floor and will not remove it in the future, that's it. He says, okay, but it's not part of the floor. But offer stam, or it's stam dirt, knows he doesn't verbally say the words, I'm nullifying. Machlokes of Yosef and Rabbanan. It's not. A house filled completely with straw or pebble, ubitloi, and he verbally abandons the straw and the pebbles, mevutal. They are nullified vis-a-vis the house. Because here's the rule, everybody. Just reminding everybody. Tumas oil, the tumah of the roof. If a dead body, if a corpse is lying in a house, okay, the tumah fills the house, the whole house becomes tummy. In fact, it keeps right on going, okay, unless there's a break. However, okay, if there is, this is only true if there isn't a tefach space between the dead person and the roof. So, in other words, if here's the corpse and here's the roof, the tumah bursts through the roof and is matama anything that stands on top of it. If there is a tefach, there's enough space to trap the tumah underneath that roof. Doesn't burst through. So now if you have a house, so that's why, for an example, when we bury a body, right, we always make sure that the casket there's always at least a tefach above the dead person. Okay, that's the truth. It does not. If it's less than a tefach, it bursts through. There's always at least a tefach, and that traps it. Right, and it traps. Today, nothing. But in back then, you would have to go, if you became Tumas Mace, you 3 and 7, you'd have to get sprinkled with the red heifer, you'd have to title. You couldn't go to the base of English, you weren't allowed to eat Kaidish food. There was plenty of ramifications. You couldn't shake people's hands. It was very difficult. Very difficult.
So that was the 7th day.
That was a 7 day, and it was extraordinarily strict.
People who lived in Jerusalem, where the Beis Hamikdash was, had to be extremely careful.
They were crazy.
Not to become tumah, this and that.
In fact, Rabbi Reisman, the Rosh Yeshiva of Terbidat, says everybody should invest in plastics, because plastics is not makabel tumah. You can't. Plastic doesn't become contaminated. So he said everybody's going to walk around with gloves. Like I said, I'm telling you, that's why we had Corona to teach us right there, and walking around in gloves, because otherwise you're not going to be able to shake anybody's hands. Because how do you know he's not tummy? Yeah. Okay. So we'll figure it out when Mashiach gets here, right? Because we're going to have to. Because that question is a great question.
You're not going to be walking.
Well, I don't know about that. He said even plastic dishes, because otherwise you're going to have to break all your dishes, right? And so I'm just telling you, Plastic is a good thing to invest in. Mr. Schlesinger is way out of the game. Okay.
I have to go backwards.
No, that's okay.
And maybe this was already answered.
Yeah.
But, okay, so there's one thought that if it's not over 20, almost,
Right.
if it's over 20, then
If
it's
the
not.
schach, it's no good.
And if it's under, but what is the definite ruling?
So the definite ruling is where we hold schach that is above 20 amas is no good.
So
It's no good either because we just don't know we're sitting in a sukkah, you got a crane in your neck, or it's because of the shade problem. The shade's going to come from the walls, right? Or most importantly, because something above that plane becomes more like a permanent residence as opposed to a arai, a temporary. And that's the one we really stick to. That's the one that your grandkids are going to learn in yeshiva is that third one. They're going to come and say, Zaidi, that sukkah of yours is 20 years up there because otherwise it's not a temporary dwelling. It's not an arai. And you'll go, oh, you're right. Wow. You're such a Talmid Chacham. Right? That's exactly what's going to happen. It's that third one that it goes. Okay? Because our sukkahs obviously aren't this small. So this is not the issue. The real issue is something that tall. It gives an appearance of a permanent.
Call you right, and you say, bring in the new mattress that we just bought.
Put it on the floor. Right, exactly. Well, wait until you have grandkids that said, Zaidi, how come you're not sleeping in the sukkah? I learned in yeshiva you have to sleep in the sukkah. So then you have to say, I have an excuse. I say, my father never slept in the sukkah, so I don't sleep in the sukkah. Tradition. Exactly. Very simple.
You have to follow.
Now all of a sudden. Okay, so then I say, his father never slept in the sukkah, because I know, because
in those days we lived in apartment houses, and the sukkahs in a courtyard. You couldn't.
But that's not even it. The truth of the matter is, it wasn't safe. Let's be honest. We grew up in the 70s. The idea of sleeping outside, right, was crazy. Today, again, no one in New York should really be sleeping outside in today's environment. I know that, but in today's environment, you got to be out of your mind. And that's it. And that's just the reality.
So don't quote me.
I always quote
you.
I'm saying,
When I do something wrong.
For the greats, my kids call him the great. My grandkids call him the great Zaidi. So when the great Zaidi, that's how they call him, the great Zaidi. When the great Zaidi does it, that's the way it is. Anyways, let's move along because it's already 10 o'clock, and we got to want to get us to almost on the base over here. So here we go. So we said what's going on over here. So we said this house is now filled up from bottom to top with stones and pebble, and you nullified it, so it's completely full. So there's no tefach. There's no tefach space between the dead person and the filled up building. So therefore, the tumah bursts right through to the heavens, right?
It's not relevant. We want to know if you put straw.
Let's see what happens. Well, let's see where we're going. Let's see where the Gemara is going. Mevutel. It's what it called. It's mevutel, and the corpse inside rises to the tumah rises to the roof. So therefore, we learn bittul in if he verbally nullifies, right? It's considered to be permanently in place. Loy bittul loy. First one, let's talk about the mace that the tumah blows through. Loy bittul loy, right? If you do not verbally nullify, no. The stones and the pebbles are not considered to be permanently there, and therefore, if the tumah does not explode through the it's considered to have that tefach that stops it. Now, but Tani along, and we learned regarding this case of a house with a corpse. Rabbi Yosi teben bein also liponoi. If one fills a house with straw and doesn't need to remove it in the future, hareyu ka'ofa stam. It's considered like just dirt, and it ubatel, and the straw is considered nullified, even though you didn't use the words, you didn't verbally nullify it, which means the house is now considered filled up, and that the tumah blows through the roof, right? But off of Ba'otilipanis, but he filled it with dirt that he will remove in the future. He's in the cement business. Hareyu kistam teben. It's like just ordinary teben, which what he calls beloy bottle, and it's not. And the dirt is not considered nullified and therefore the mace the tumor is trapped and doesn't go flying. We're now, okay? Now, therefore, in our case, the same now rule applies. It really depends on how you look at it. Is the straw on the floor that you put there, if you mean to keep the straw there and you never no use to ever use it again, even if you don't verbally say anything, it's considered nullified and it's considered part of the way, and you have lowered the sukkah. So now we're going to go a little further. I just want to get us started on this. Remember, I told you guys what. Here we go. Here we go. We're on 4A2. Okay, 4A2. The sukkah was taller than 20 amas. And the leaves of the palm trees that comprised the schach were dangling into the airspace within 20 amas of the floor. So the branch was above 20 amas, but the leaves hanging down were lower than 20 amas. If the shade being given from those leaves hanging down below the 20 amas line are enough to give more shade than sunlight, kishera, it's kosher. Psula, then it's puzzle because they're meaningless, because then we look at the branches and not the things. Says Gemara, if the sukkah was exactly 10 tefachim tall, which is the minimum height, 10 handbreadths are the minimum height. Okay, so that's about, that's a tefach, about 2.5 feet, exactly, about 30 inches, right? So if it was exactly 10 tefachim high, and the leaves of the palm branches that make up the schach dangle within the 10 tefachim space, that means if they're real sechach, the sechach is hanging lower than 10 tefachim. Now it's the opposite way. If the sunlight from these leaves that are hanging out is more than the shade, which means that they're no good schach, it's okay. They don't affect the fact that they've shrunk the size of your sukkah because they don't work. So Amalei Rabba, no. Hadira Seruchi. But in fact, then this becomes an odious sukkah, uncomfortable sukkah. You're tiny, you got things poking you on the head, palm leaves on the head. It doesn't have any. It doesn't even count. So therefore, no good. They make it no good. Now, let's keep going a little further. I know we're going a little over time, but I just want to just going to go 5 more minutes because I just want to get us some other guys here. If the sukkah was taller than 20 amas, its tabo, and one built a platform. Okay, look inside the Hebrew version. You see on the page, there is right here. Look over here. You got the thing. What they bought, and the first words of it, right? Ubana its tabo. Keneged doifen hoem tsayal pnei kula. Opposite the entire face of the sukkah's middle wall. So in other words, that's the first picture where the platform touches all 3 walls. You see it? The first picture? How many walls does the sukkah have to have? 3. Okay? Or 2.5, but which is 3. For the purposes of this, it's 3. And this platform itself contains the minimum required area of a sukkah, either a 4x4 or 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim, depending on who you hold like. Kishera, the sukkah is now kosher because you can sit on top of that thing. It's the size of a thing. It's touching all. You notice you take this table and you put it that way and it touches all 3 walls. We're good to go. As long as you sit in that part of the sukkah, obviously, because that part is now lower than 20 amas. Minat sad. Look at the second picture. You take the table the way we have it, and you push it into the corner. How many walls is it touching? 2. Sukkah with 2 walls. Oh, good. Very good. But it's not. We're now on 483, right? Im yesh. Now we're getting to something interesting. Im yesh mitzaper itztabal lekoisel arba amas. If the edge of the platform look over here, guys. We push the table this way, touching these two walls. If the edge of the table, okay, is within a distance of 4 amas from this wall, which it's not touching, right? This wall right by my father, psula. If it's a if it's a distance of 4 amas, psula. Palkais miyarba amas, yeah, palkais miyarba amas, less than 4 amas, kishera is kosher. That don't give away the secrets here. Faces a little. What's going on here? One minute. What do I care? I understand. If it's more than 4 amas away, obviously it's possible. But why? What's the difference even if it's closer to 4 amas? It's only touching, the platform is only touching 2 sides, right? We know a sukkah requires 3. Well, okay, but it needs a 3rd wall. It needs, even if that 3rd wall is the size of a fist or a 1 by 1. But where's our 3rd wall? So what is it? So okay, so it's 3 amas away. What does that help me? It's not attached. Now, Jeff, now you gotta imagine. Remember I told you? Here we go. My kamash. What are you coming to teach us? It's a double pashti. You need to know what we're about to learn is all halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This legal theory of walls came down from Moshe on Sinai. It didn't just come like this, but it is a legal theory that has great ramifications throughout many different situations. Okay, but here we go. This one.
Remember, this is only for in legality in the halacha, nothing to do with the
Architecture.
Architecture.
Well, actually, this will explain how people have skylights in their kitchen and they turn it into sukkahs, even though the skylight is not quite to the walls. Here we go. Here we are. My kamash. Well, you always giving away the story. Read it inside. You're telling us about the theory of the bent wall. What's the big deal? Tanan, Tanina, we already learned it in the Mishnah. Right, we learned it in the Mishnah. Then we're going to get to it. We're going to get into inside. Wait, now we're going to get to it. In the case of a house where the roof was breached, you created a skylight, and the owner placed schach over the skylight, which happens all the time. I'm thinking of my neighbor across the street, Shlomi Wiesner, who has a sukkah in his kitchen, right? Im yesh min ha-kaisel. If there is distance to the kaisel of 4 feet, 4 amas, lislesaich arba amas, psula, it's no good. Hapachas mikan, less than 4 feet, kishera. In other words, if it's less than 4 amas away from your schach, we actually look at the wall as if it's bent. That space, it's connected in your mind, and therefore you've got your 3rd wall. My schach's not touching it. It's within 4 amas. Within 4 amas, doifin akuma. It bends over. You imagine that it is bent over. Okay? So therefore we realize you can't sit there because it's not under the schach. But as far as our sukkah having 3 walls, got my 3 walls. Mahu the same. I might have thought, awesome in the case of our Mishnah coming up on Daf 17, on Daf Yud Zayin. Who the chazil doifen? Since the walls are fit to be used as a sukkah wall, it's a good wall. The wall of my kitchen is good. It's just, it has to, we have to look at it as if it's bent because it's within 4 amas of my sukkah. But here, where it's not, what do you call it? The platform does not, the platform is not touching this at all. There is no, it's really empty, right? It's not worthy to be a sukkah wall. Amaloi, maybe I don't say this theory. Kamashmala, no, it doesn't matter. As long as I got something to bend, imaginatively, good enough. Within 4 amas. Okay, that's rule number one, the rule of doifen akuma, a bent wall. So that's number one. If the sukkah was taller than 20 amas, right, and you build a platform in the middle of the to reduce the height. If the edge from the platform to the walls of distance in all directions, in other words, right here, here's our platform, everybody. And from this wall, that wall, that wall, that wall, let's 3 walls. That wall, that wall, that wall, there's 4 amas. No good. Meaning, pachas mi'arba amas, less than, in other words, from here to here is less than 4 amas. From there to there is less than 4 amas. From here to here is less than 4 amas. We've got 3 walls bending now. Okay? Kosher. What's the big deal? We already learned about this idea of this imaginary, okay, with 1 wall, I'm willing to admit, okay, 1 wall I can imagine and it's bent over. But now you're telling me I can put it in the middle and I can imagine all the walls going. I've got 3 imaginary bent walls. Maybe album called Ruach Loi from every direction. I can't say this theory. Kamashma, no, the theory holds true. The theory holds true. And there we go. Okay, 1 more. So that way, 1 more. If the sukkah was less than 4 tvachim, okay, that means tall. If the sukkah was less than 10 tvachim tall, I'm sorry, which means if the table, let's say, is 10 tvachim, it's less than 10 tvachim. Okay, it's 9 tvachim, which is far too small. Even I, at my height, can't climb in there. Okay, so the so one in the middle of this sukkah digs out a hole, so that now, right by that hole, you dig it out, you make a pit. So now there's 10 tvachim over there to make it, right? But it's in the middle, right where this is. Okay, so there we go. So now we get it. If now we're dealing with the floor, okay? So the floor, remember, it's not high enough, so we dig a hole in the middle. If from the edge of that pit that you just created to the walls is 3 tvachim, 1, 2, 3, psula, no good. But we're on Amid base. If it's only from the edge of that pit, there's only 2 tvachim to the walls, Shayla, it's kosher. Why? Okay, I'll admit, right at that pit in the middle, because I dug down, we now have our 10 tvachim. What does that help me on the sides? Right? What is this business of 2 tvachim this way, 2 tvachim this way? It is good. If it's 3 tvachim, it's no good. What's the difference? It says the Gemara, and the answer to this is because there's something called, before we were talking about Daif and Akuma, now we're talking about Lovud. Lovud, which says anything less than 3 tvachim. So in other words, if you have a partition that stops before it hits the ground, okay? Before it hits the ground, right? It goes like this, and goats can't get underneath there. That's Daif and Akuma. That's good asking. Oh no, sorry, right. Love it goes in and says the same way you have the bent walls. So on the ground, I can see things are connected. Okay, we can connect them.
Separate by less than 3 tvachim.
It's as if it's one. It's one. So it says the Gemara. What's the difference over there by you say Akuma that it's tied to Amos, right? The bent wall theory is tied to less than 4 Amos. I can see the walls as bent. By Lovud, why on the ground do I get less than 3, right? Much smaller, obviously, shear. There where it is a legal wall, but it's over 20 amas tall, right? It's too high. It's too high. Pakas mi amasagi. It's sufficient a distance of less than 4 amas. But here you have to first create a legal wall. I don't even have a wall. A wall is not called a wall until it gets to at least 10 tefachim. Anything less than 10 tefachim doesn't legally have the name of a wall. In other words, a mechitza, a partition between the men's section and the ladies section, has to be a minimum of how tall? 10 tefachim. That's it. What? First, the halacha. The halacha, a mechitza is a mechitza. Ramosha says that. Mechitza is a mechitza. 10 tefachim. We're going to get into the shul in the Hamptons probably tomorrow. Okay? Okay, because they use every one of these tricks. Okay? So, you got it? So, here by Lovud, I first have to create something that's called a wall. You have to create the idea of a wall. See, before we have a wall, it just needs to be brought down for Sukka. Here, I don't even have a wall yet. I have to first create a wall in order to first create my Sukka. Right? Here I have to create a wall. I can say Lovud that I look at it as one long thing over here when it's less than 3 tvachim from the space that I dug out to make it a legal wall. But 3 tvachim already is too far away and I can't call it a legal wall. Does this make sense? Good. Says the Gemara. One more. So we've gotten Daifin Akuma, and Lovud. If the sukkah was taller than 20 amas, and you built a pillar, just a simple pillar in the middle that is 10 tvachim tall, and it contains the minimum required area for a sukkah. Let's say it's bigger by 7 by 7 tvachim. Okay, the pole is 7 by 7 tvachim tall. It's a height of 10 tvachim. And its area is 7 by 7 or 4 by 4, whichever one you want to call it. This is what my father said before. Good asik, the third one now, the third imaginative. Good asik mechitzas. That what? That we can take a look at it as if it's going zoop, upwards. It's going straight to the heavens. Okay? Good asik mechitzas. That if a wall or partition is 10 tefachim high, we can view it as extending upward to whatever height is needed in any given situation. Once I've got 10 tvachim, I can look at the walls like this. So my mechitza in shul, as long as it's 10 tvachim tall, even if I can actually see the women on the other side, it's kosher because in your mind, the mechitza is going all the way to the ceiling. Sure you can. Amazing. Only one question?
Okay, so if you built a sukkah in your backyard.
Yeah.
And it's
Less than 10 tvachim tall?
well, it's 20.
It's too high. It's too high. No, it's too high, right? 20 up to 20 amas is good, right?
You come out the next morning and the wind's blowing, and now your sukkah is tilting.
No problem.
So that from the ground to the top is less than 10.
Yeah, right.
But if you look at it as a triangle,
This is the question. We're not up to the yet.
is that actually a question?
Yeah, because it's circular
Yeah,
sukkah.
was that
Is a circular sukkah kosher? Is a circular sukkah, is it? I did not say yes. Far from it. Circular, is it kosher or not? Inquiring minds want to know. Is a crooked sukkah, period. You build it crooked.
What he's saying, it's now that it's tilted.
I know.
It's like a diagonal.
Yeah, yeah, but I'm asking. No, on one side it's higher, on one side it's lower. But I'm not going there. I'm first saying, is it a kosher sukkah to begin with? It's no longer a rectangle. It's no longer a square. It's something else. Is it exactly? So the first question becomes, is it a kosher sukkah? Forget everything else. You don't even get to that part. That's right. And by the way, it's very odious.
Yes.
And Rava will say if it's an odious sukkah, it's not a sukkah. And we pass it that way. It's not comfortable. So, in other words, you don't even get to your question. You don't even get to the question. It's only after you can answer the question, is it a kosher sukkah? Then you can say, oh, did the dimensions work out? But you don't even get to the dimensions yet because you still have to ask them other basic questions, which now you understand why. Sukkah has a lot of rules. It's one of the most hardest things to learn. That's where I wanted to get to these today, because now we're coming on to this idea. You got 10 tvachim, a pillar, zoop, shoots to the sky. We're finishing up right over here. Okay, this is where we're saying, Amalei Rava, Be'inin mechitzes hanikaris, we need noticeable walls for the sukkah. Veleka, there aren't. You're right. Good ask, no, I just want to say, good ask mechitzes is a theory. You're right. When we have 10 tvachim, we look at it as if it's shooting to the wall. But we're dealing with a sukkah. I can't bring my grandkids in here and tell them we're sitting in a sukkah, because at the end of the day, they're going to look out and they don't see any wall. And that doesn't work. I need to know I'm sitting in a sukkah separate from the chitzis. This is what Rav is saying. Separate from the rule of mechitzah. You're right. The mechitzah is a real mechitzah. It's all great. Theoretically, you got it. But you're missing something very fundamental. I still need to know I'm sitting in a sukkah and I can't. So that doesn't work. We're going to continue from here tomorrow on this whole thing, good asik, and there's two things, good asik, that we look like it's going in, upwards, then there's good as, what's the other one? Good asik and good achiz, which means going down. That means if you get to within 3 tvachim of the ground, we look at it like it's all the way down. If it's above 3 tvachim above, that little goat can come in, can do it.
I was giving that example. That was for a friend.